I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
I do believe that Africa is claiming what Africa feels entitled to.
Africa aims for better representation at the UN and on the world stage as it looks to address long-term challenges.
We need to reconceptualize international partnerships for Africa.
A continent in transition and preparing for the future.
Science, technology, innovation needs to become organic, needs to enter our DNA.
A conversation with the Secretary General's Special Advisor on Africa. Next.
The United Nations is made up of 193 member states. Nearly 30% of them hail from the African continent. But Africa has long been underrepresented in global governance. That could be changing. There is a push for reform at the UN that could include greater representation at the Security Council. The continent is a priority for Secretary General Antonio Guterres. During February's African Union Summit, he stressed the need to address injustices that often stand in the way of development. The UN's Office of the Special Advisor on Africa works in concert with the Secretary General's priorities, leading the engagement strategy for the continent. In this episode of UN Insider, I sit down with Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Cristina Duarte. Under-Secretary General Duarte, thank you so much for joining us. There's been a lot of conversation and compelling arguments, the push to add 2 permanent seats on the UN Security Council representing the African continent, and as 2 more non-permanent members as well. How important is it to have African representation when so many issues are coming up at these meetings, and the continent makes up a large part of the world's population?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here having this conversation about Africa. Allow me to say that I don't think it's a question of importance, but I see it more as a question of entitlement. Entitlement is something objective. Important is subjective. I do believe that Africa is claiming what Africa feels entitled to. This is at least my feeling as an African. And we need to understand what is behind this entitlement. What are the values and principles? Fairness, justice, respect. So, as the Secretary General said, it's not only a question of ethics and justice, but in one of his statements, he underscored that Africa's representation, Africa's voice in the UN Security Council, is at the same time a question of strategic importance on a global geopolitical arena. So I do believe that Africa is entitled to, yes.
How soon can that come?
Geopolitical reforms, geopolitical correlation of forces, and long-term historical dynamics. This is the context that we need to understand Africa's claim. In the past 60 years, what happened? Africa's views, perspectives, interests, problems, solutions, wishes, vision have not been processed at all in general, by the international, by the multilateral, let's say, or international arena. So, but at the same time, these long-term historical dynamics, they have not stopped. So we reach a point where the adjustment has to happen. It can be today, it can be in 10 years, but we all know that historical dynamics are unstoppable. It's just a question of time when, and history will decide.
I want to ask you about this year's flagship report that you have released, Unpacking Africa's Debt Towards a Lasting and Durable Solution. What are the biggest takeaways from that report?
The main purpose of that report was clearly to challenge the narrative on Africa's debt. I'm sure that you are convinced that first Africa is in debt distress. I confirm, is in debt distress. And I'm sure that you are convinced that the cause or the reason of Africa being in debt distress is because Africa is over in debt. No, not at all. The reason of Africa's debt distress, the root cause, is the fact that Africa does not control its own economic and financial flows. Actually, Africa is not over in debt. On the opposite, Africa's external public debt is around 65%. Is low if we compare to Africa's financing needs from A to Z. Africa needs to build everything, as in Europe after the Second World War, correct? So, and the main purpose of the report is the need to challenge that narrative, identify the root cause, and redesign global, regional, and national policies to finally tackle the root cause. Africa loses $500 billion a year. We cannot consider Africa over in debt. So we need to understand the root cause of Africa's debt distress. And this is linked to our 2023 report, where we basically say that Africa has been captured by a triple paradox in the past 60 years. The financing paradox, where Africa is rich in financial resources, but sometimes in debt distress, allow me to say begging for ODA, but at the same time is losing $500 billion annually. This finance paradox has been feeding another one, the energy paradox. Africa is rich in energy sources. You think about an energy sources, you ask me, I will tell you that Africa has it. But 600 million people have no access to electricity in the 21st century. This energy paradox has been feeding another one, the food systems paradox. Africa is rich in agricultural resources and water, but in permanent food insecurity. So we have the financing feeding energy, feeding food systems. So in order to break this triple paradox, we need to start with the financing one. And just break the paradox so that Africa controls its economic and financial flows.
So, what are the challenges and the obstacles that remain in breaking that triple paradox? How do you get there?
I have been saying, if Africa loses $500 billion, it's because Africa has been able to generate $500 billion. We cannot lose something that we don't have. So if Africa loses $500 billion, it's because Africa has been able to produce or I would say to generate the $500 billion. So the challenge is Africa generates financial resources, but has been unable to keep them, to retain them, to mobilize them. What is the missing piece? What is the missing piece between the ability to generate and the inability to keep them? absence of the state, weak institutions, weak country systems. Otherwise, it will be difficult to address this issue.
Coming up,
So far, STEM has been serving as a gourmet. No, it should be the main course.
UN Insider.
Introducing CGTN Now. Find award-winning documentaries and exclusive content from around the world. Latin America like you've never seen. Breakthrough films shining a light on important stories. In-depth discussions with fascinating people. Giving you new perspective on topics that matter. You also get live, round-the-clock international news and headlines, and so much more. Original content from CGTN's Global Bureau. Download the CGTN Now app and find the global perspective you've been missing. Available on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire, or go to cgtnnow.com on your tablet or mobile device. CGTN Now. See the difference.
Debt distress presents an obstacle for Africa's development. 19 of 35 low-income sub-Saharan countries are either in or at high risk of debt distress. In 2009, African governments spent about 3% of their budgets on debt servicing. Last year, debt servicing accounted for 14% of budgets, outstripping spending on education and healthcare. Africa is home to more than 1.4 billion people. The continent is expected to account for nearly 25% of the global population by 2050. Africa's development is a critical part of the effort to reach the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Let's continue my conversation with Cristina Duarte. If you can, tell us a little bit more about the outcomes of the high-level political forums Africa Day and how you plan to implement what came out of it.
The 2024, as you know, high-level political forum focus on 5 SDGs. 1, no poverty. 2, no anger or zero anger. 13, climate action. 16, peace, security, and institutions. And 17, partnerships. If you look back in the past 60 years and you screen Africa policy-making work streams, as well as the way international partnerships have been participating in these policy-making work streams in Africa, I'm sure that you will notice that 99% of them are focused on managing poverty. How come you are focused on managing poverty in a rich continent? Don't think this is a contradiction, not to say a paradox. So I think we need to stop and reset, with all my due respect. Moving our mindsets from managing poverty, because it does not make sense for Africa, is rich. And shift our mindsets to manage development by leveraging Africa's natural, economic, and financial resources. But to move from managing poverty to manage development, which is essentially a mindset shift, you need the SDG 16. Because in order to do that, you need to recognize that you need to restart, maybe in Africa, a process of state building, in the sense of putting in place effective states to deliver development, only again with institutions and country systems. Then we move to SDG 17, the last SDG in this. We need to reconceptualize international partnerships for Africa, because they are not aligned in supporting Africa shifting from managing poverty to managing development.
You speak about development. I want to touch on your growing tech hubs on the continent. Nigeria being touted as a place where young people can grow their businesses. Um, Talk to us a little bit about the importance of STEM education when it comes to jobs and development on the continent. Africa, as we know, has the youngest population on Earth, and that number is expected to double by 2050.
We reach a point in Africa where science, technology, innovation needs to become organic, needs to enter our DNA, not just a compilation of success stories. We might have dozens of success stories on technology and innovation, but we're still far away of reaching the point of technology innovation to become something organic. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge. So I believe that in order to make it organic, it's we need to decide in a clear way the division of labor between the state, civil society, and private sector as far as science, technology, innovation is concerned. The responsibility of the state should be to create a science, technology, innovation ecosystem. With this ecosystem, private sector and civil society should jump and move forward. Let me give you the example of the 18 million jobs that Africa needs to create on an annual basis. Do you know what is the best job creator in Africa? It's not the state. It's not the private sector. It's the youth, African youth. 95% of youth employment are informal employment. Who creates employment in Africa? Young people themselves, not the state, not the private sector. So we need to approach this as a mutual responsibility, where a division of labor needs to be decided, so each one understands its role. STEM is a critical piece for the state to build the ecosystem. I used to say that so far STEM has been serving as a gourmet. No, it should be the main course. We should deliver STEM as long as we have Wi-Fi. We need to scale it up in Africa. We need to increase in a massive way STEM education. Move of this perception of being gourmet, maybe only in private school, and to make it the main course under a baobab tree. And by doing so, we'll be feeding the ecosystem.
Coming up.
That Africa that we want, we Africans, at the same time is the Africa the world needs.
UN Insider.
Holding guns. Word protesters. Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
For developing nations, multilateral partnerships can provide key resources to boost development and ensure no one is left behind. I asked Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Cristina Duarte, about China's role in Africa's development. Can you tell us more about the goals of Agenda 2063 and how they align with the UN's priorities?
The Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General, they see it in a different way. It's not Agenda 2063 to align with UN priorities, but is a UN system to align with the 2063 agenda. And both of them, the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General, they have been very clear on that. The need, the imperative of the UN system to align with 2063 priorities. And I'm really happy to say that this alignment has been done. We are aligned. We are aligned. The challenge is not the alignment. The challenge is how efficient and how effective is the UN system in supporting African countries in delivering the 2063 agenda. This is our challenge as a system. And this is exactly where and when the Secretary General's reforms comes into play, namely the UN 2.0. The UN 2.0, the main purpose or the ultimate goal of UN 2.0 is to make the UN system more efficient, more effective in serving the 2063 agenda, in serving national development priorities. And we are, as a system, we are already doing so.
Undersecretary General, how would you describe China's relationship with AU countries, African Union countries, and China's role in development and partnerships on the African continent?
As you know, is outstanding. As you know, is outstanding. I was Minister of Finance. I interact with China as one of the main partners of Cape Verde, and was an outstanding partnership. But allow me to take the opportunity of your question to mention the South-South cooperation. I think it's critical for the next 25 years of Africa's development. Is not a small detail, is not a small piece in the puzzle. The South-South cooperation. In my view, the South-South cooperation is facing a dilemma. And we need to be aware of that. If the South-South cooperation will just copy and paste the cooperation model that basically started right after the Second World War II, the Second World War, I believe it will fail. That model is over. That model is broken. But if the South-South cooperation will be able, recognizing, as we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the long-term historical dynamics, recognize that the geopolitical tectonic plates are moving, and the new cooperation development model needs to emerge, then the South-South cooperation will succeed. We have positive signs that we are in that direction, the BRICS, etc., etc. Let's see. Wait and see.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our international audience about your hopes and any optimism you feel in your current position and what you hope to accomplish?
There are three long-term historical dynamics that are unstoppable. The first one is the increased economic and political space of emerging economies. The second one is the falling apart of the neo-colonial systems. They are falling apart. This is another long-term historical dynamic. The third one is the emergence of new leadership profiles in Africa. These three elements need to be processed very careful for everybody, inside Africa and outside, particularly for the South-South cooperation. And based on these three long-term historical dynamics, yes, I am positive that Africa will occupy its global player seat in the geopolitical arena. I'm completely positive. Agenda 2063 is the Africa we want, it's clear. But that Africa that we want, we Africans, at the same time, is the Africa the world needs. Let's be ready and build a win-win situation.
Undersecretary General Cristina Duarte, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our part.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.